Well, welcome, Michael, and we do already have Michael with us to continue from yesterday.
Thank you, dear heart, and we'll see if it's going to be a part 1 and part 2, or maybe it'll be a part 1, part 2, who knows? We'll see. Welcome,
Except
Michael.
It'll have to wait till after vacation.
Yes, that's true.
All right. Michael, you're on.
Thank you all. Good day to you.
You've got the floor, sir.
Well?
We're rocking.
Thank you. Great.
Rocking. Just made 3 quarts of tomato ketchup out of the garden. You know, seeing as how we're heading out tomorrow for this week of vacation, we've kind of cleaned out the garden and finished off our tomatoes, except for our cherry tomatoes, and making tomato sauce and getting ready to travel. So.
6 pints of pesto, too.
Yeah, 6 pints of pesto.
That sounds
both Thai basil and regular basil pesto.
Wonderful. That's for sure. That is for sure. Well, great. I reviewed the notes from yesterday, and
did it all make sense?
Information. It is coming together. It is coming together. For sure.
When I look at, I was going to say, when I look at the knowledge that Yeshua had about how the mind worked, the keys and the clues that he gave for how the mind works, it's amazing that I'm not even sure how to say it, but that society's carrying on in ignorance of that and the challenges that it creates. It's just amazing.
Yes.
But here we are, getting the gist of it.
Yes, one by one. And when you say that, I'm trying to remember how you said it in my mind, that the power person agenda basically rules the world. I mean, that is just so enormous. It's hard to wrap my mind around that. And that power person I see coming as a result of not doing the forgiveness work.
Ultimately, that's exactly what it is.
Mm-hmm.
The repeating generational patterns.
Yes.
Time for change.
Yes, one at a time, right? One at a time.
Well, hopefully, through the radio show, it's dozens, hundreds, thousands at a time.
Yes.
Ultimately, that's the aim.
And the more that grasp, the more they will speak to others, and the more change we'll have in the world.
Precisely.
Mm-hmm.
So where is your thinking at today? Are there any questions from the notes that you went over yesterday that we need to clarify?
Not at this point.
Good. That's awesome. We covered a lot of territory yesterday.
A lot, yes. Now I'm still unraveling, still
I talked to Diana yesterday afternoon, and she was excited.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah, she texted me and said she would be on today.
I suggested we might get you two working as a team, working as accountability partners might help along the path.
Yes. Yes. Unfortunately, she had a conflict. She wouldn't be on today, but I'll fill it in over the weekend.
Cool.
So that would be nice. And that is the connection and how we met. Isn't that just wonderful how that works?
Mm-hmm. It is, for sure.
Yes. So as I reviewed the notes, reviewed the thoughts, now I'm thinking, if you don't see another path to start the worksheet, see how all this fits into the worksheet.
Let's go for it.
Okay, and of course, if you got other suggestions, I'm open.
No, I think we set the stage for it yesterday, ready to rock. This will be a good completion point.
Okay. So in helping others see this worksheet, and how would you, as you would give this information to me, I want to log it here so I can also give it to others. Where's the first step?
Well, if you look at the first words on the page, reality management, which doesn't mean a whole lot to most people because they don't know what reality is. They think it's what's going on in the world. And the truth is, reality is the output of the mind. Actuality is what's going on in the world. You know, if an accident happens and you step inside of a courtroom, you have 6 different people, and you wonder if any 2 of them were at the same accident. How is that possible? They all were at the same accident. It's like, well, yes, they all experienced the same actuality, but each person's mind had its own output, its own reality. And so recognizing that reality has a quality, you want to keep your mind tweaked so that its quality is 100% all the time. Because if it isn't, then all kinds of crazy things happen. So we're looking to manage collapsed false reality and only live out of the highest quality reality possible. And so we define that at the beginning of the worksheet at the top left. My reality, perception, an internal construct of my mind. So my reality is a construct. Actuality is what happened. And then forgiveness is the tool for waking up from or changing my reality. So this is the how-to of first century Aramaic forgiveness.
Awesome. What is the reality is the output of the mind. And
correct.
You said something about the world, and I lost the term there that you mentioned.
Yeah, actuality. So we have reality and actuality. There's what actually happened, and there's my perception of it, your perception of it, and the 100 other people that were watching the event. Each mind selects its own 9 bits of data. Actually, the lab stat said 7 plus or minus 2. So someone whose reality is made up of the 7 minus would tend not to have so much comprehension or practical smarts about what's happening in the world. The person who would have the full 7 plus 2, 9 bits, would tend to have a more comprehensive and more accurate reality.
Okay.
So we're looking to recognize when reality is based in corrupt data, and if it is, recognize its quality is poor, it's going to lead us to conflict, and we want to remove or forgive that reality. So the application of forgiveness is to one's reality structure, not to a person in their lives. Strictly speaking, the act that most of the world calls forgiveness is actually pardoning. I'm going to let you off the hook for what's happening inside of me is the act of pardoning. And most people call that forgiveness. And of course, if I've already let you off the hook, then I think I've forgiven. Then the roots of the reality that I'm experiencing that's so painful or traumatic are still there. And if I never get to drop in and remove those roots, then I get to live the title of my book. Why is this happening to me again?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a premise that goes along with the worksheet, and that is the top line up there. My essential nature, my human life, my very being is love. And if you ever forget that, hold a newborn. Tap into the essence of the newborn. And notice when you tap into the essence of a newborn, the newborn isn't loving you, the newborn is love. Love is a noun, it's a state of being. We live in a culture that by and large has a specialty of knocking the love out of us and then sending us out to find somebody to love us or to find somebody to love. So now people are on a total false journey. They talk about falling in love, which is kind of silly when you realize that love is your essential nature, and the pursuit of life, if you're not experiencing yourself as love, would be to restore yourself to the experience of yourself as love. But most people are out there trying to find somebody to fill the hole, somebody to love them or somebody to love. And it's a foolish journey. So the idea here is to strip away everything from our genetics and from our perceptual structure that is unlike love, that is unlike the truth of who we are. So the goal of this internal forgiveness wake-up sheet is to empower me to remove fear and or hostility and return to the direct experience of love 24/7, 365. And the first step, number 1A, is to acknowledge yourself as love. So and the idea here is you fill in your name. So if you're doing this worksheet, it would be I, Michael, who am love, am experiencing, and here now you want to identify your emotions. And oftentimes in a particular circumstance, one might have several different emotions. There might be anger, there might be fear, there might be sadness, there might be rage. And each one of those emotions is indicative of a different part of the mind that's in need of healing. So we suggest that you do one emotion per worksheet. If there's more than one emotion around a given event, then you do one worksheet for each emotion that you hold. And the reason for that is recognizing, when you realize that when we open our eyes and we say, I see the piece of art on the wall, I see the television, I see the lamp, I see the mirror, I see the door, that's all a lie. We're not seeing anything with our eyes, but our brain, having the brain cells for those things, is generating the picture world that we see. And when you start to realize how much underlying information has to be firing up, how much has to be in brain cells in order for us to recognize the mirror or the TV. Baby opens his eyes and TV's in front of him. Baby doesn't say, oh, there's TV. No brain cells. Go back to Yeshua 2,000 years ago, and he talked about this principle. He said, in order to utilize his work, you had to have the eyes to see and the ears to hear. Now, I think we can safely assume most everybody in his audience had what we call physical eyes and ears, so he wasn't talking about that. What in essence he was saying is you've got to have the brain cells, you've got to have the content that accurately represents the brain cells that his words are communicating in order to understand correctly what he's saying. One of my favorites, and we've already talked about this, but most people have a concept from the culture of sin being this evil, awful, involves Satan, all kinds of things, definition, guilty, bad, hell, all sorts of things attached to it, all sorts of results from the file folder effect that leave people in trauma and terror around that simple word. When in Aramaic, if you have the brain cells for Yeshua's word sin, the word sin is an archery term. It simply means you missed the target. If you fired at the bullseye and you missed the bullseye, the scorekeeper yelled sin. If you missed the target altogether, the scorekeeper would yell evil. It's not all the baggage that the Greeks have put into it to keep people in fear and trauma. So you've got to have the eyes to see and the ears to hear that Yeshua was speaking with in order to make sense of what he was saying. Otherwise, all kinds of crazy. Let's look at it. We live in a culture where there are 32,000 sects of so-called Christianity. Each one, sure, they've got the dogma and the doctrine correct. Mm-hmm. When the man said, I come to bring life, not dogma and doctrine. And so rather than, we have the answer or we have the correct dogma, no dogma or doctrine here, nothing to believe. We have a set of tools that we've decoded out of the Aramaic. Take it and put it to work and you'll arrive at your own conclusions. You'll understand what he was saying if you develop the brain cells for what was being offered. So now when I say, as somebody who's been, embedded with all the fear and trauma around the word sin, and they look at that word now, they've got a whole new set of brain cells, it's a whole different process. So what we're looking to do is establish the brain cells for the first century meaning of his words, and to forgive or remove the brain cell content that didn't belong in the mind in the first place. So again, when you realize, gee, I look and I see all these complex things in there, I think I see them, but what's really happening is my brain is generating those complex things that I see. And how many brain cells have to fire in order to open your eyes and look over there and see a TV and a curtain on the wall and a wallpaper and a dresser and a candle, piece of art? How many brain cells has to fire in order to produce that? An emotion represents, an emotion based in hostility or fear represents brain cells firing that are corrupt. And so the reason for doing one sheet per emotion is that in order to get the mind back to accurate perception, you have to remove the content that doesn't relate to this particular emotion. And we'll see what causes emotions in a few minutes. So do you have a particular worksheet that you're going to do and an emotion to key in with? Actually, what I usually do, like when I'm doing this in a workshop format, I'll have people think about a situation in their lives where they have some form of upset. And I'll usually start off by saying, and make sure it's a small one, what this worksheet does is it tends to bring forward and show us our unconsciousness. And if you start with your big major life issue, which when people hear it's possible to remove this stuff, it's like, oh man, that's great. I'm ready to take on, I've had this problem with my mother-in-law for 45 years, and I'm going to work it out today. It's like, no, on your first worksheet, you're not going to work out a big emotional issue that's been going on for 45 years. Start with a small one. Build the brain cells and learn the mechanics of the tool. Then put the tool to work on the deeper things. So I'll invite, if you're going to sit down with someone to do a worksheet, and invite them to pick out a small issue, a definitive small issue, and make it an issue about another person. So number 1C, you've named the object of attention of the worksheet. So who are you going to do your worksheet on? Have you got somebody in mind?
So yes, we could do that. I was going to do the family situation, but I understand what you've just explained for the last few moments, so that would not be a good start. How about we do a worksheet? There's a particular gentleman we'll just say his name is George, and he has, is in the local area, done a few things that I'm not too happy about. How's that, for starters?
Okay. So what George has done has brought up or fired brain cells in you of some form of unhappiness.
Yes, I would.
Okay.
I would say that's a good place to start. Unhappiness.
Okay. So let's put George in there, and then what specifically? Pick one specific thing. There maybe are many things from the sound of it, but pick one specific thing that resonates disturbance in you. And what would that be?
Okay. Let's go with...
So 1C, you put his name in there. So you're naming the object of your attention, then a brief description of what it is that you're thinking of that George has done.
Yes, and in 1B would go unhappiness. That's the key point in 1B, correct?
Right. Well,
Okay.
it might be unhappiness, or it might be a variety of things. But when I'm starting a worksheet, I'll have people fill in the name of the object of their attention before we do the emotion. other than fill in the name of the object of attention, so it's George, and then whatever George has done.
Okay.
You want to complete number 1C.
So 1C is completed before B. Okay, so 1C, George, and the object of attention. He has changed the view of where I live greatly.
Okay.
The natural setting.
Okay, so he's altered the trees or the land?
Correct, both, yes.
Okay. Okay. And then, so you've done that, and then number 1B, what emotion does that bring up for you? You mean it's unhappiness? Is it frustration? Is it anger? Is it rage?
I think it's probably more than one, so I'll practice more. But unhappiness, certainly.
Okay.
You had mentioned that, and that definitely fits, so.
All right, so that'd be the key one. And then you'll see a little box beneath number 1B that says draw your feelings. And sometimes, or draw your emotions. Sometimes our emotions are pre-verbal. They come from a time when we didn't even have language, and so they can sometimes be difficult to put into words. And so just a simple line drawing, like a little kid might make, appropriate to put in that particular box.
Okay.
And then there's a little reminder that says, if I'm in pain, my thinking's in error. That pain isn't caused by the events in my world, pain is caused by what's moving inside of me.
Mm-hmm.
And so, filled in the emotion, you've drawn the picture. So hostility and fear are from internal corrupt data and indicate my use of sustained incoherence to build this disturbing internal construct. Sustained incoherence is a term that was coined by a physicist back, 50 years ago, named David Bohm. And David Bohm was a cohort of Einstein's, worked actually in Einstein's lab for a time period. He helped to do the math when he was a student that helped him to develop the atomic bomb. And he was a pretty well-known physicist. But he also studied in the realm of psychology, and he coined this term, sustained incoherence, and what the conclusion he arrived at was that the problem most people have is created, problems most people have is created by their thinking. The people never or rarely look into their own thinking process. They've always got somebody or something else to blame. And even when they become aware that their thinking is the problem, they'll tend to continue to think that way. And that's what David Bohm called sustained incoherence.
Amazing.
So
I see that as a footnote at the bottom of the page also.
Yes, the definition, yes.
Great.
So whenever hostility or fear, and this is kind of like a shortcut step to recognize I don't need to look at situations or circumstances or anything else. If my mind is moving hostility and fear, my mind is using corrupt data. I don't need to look outside of me to try to understand anything. I need to look inside of me to quell, to work through the corrupt data and get my mind on track with truth, get my perception in alignment with what's possible. So hostility and fear indicate my use of sustained incoherence to build this disturbing internal construct. My denial causes my CBM, and CBM, again, the definition's down below, but it's carbon-based memory. If we were to talk to a modern-day physiologist and he did a breakdown of the chemicals that are in what we call our body, you find that the base element is carbon. And carbon's an interesting atom with 6 electrons, 6 protons, 6 neutrons. And the fact that that memory contains the hostilities and fears of all the generations, it gives a whole new meaning to that number from the scriptures of 666. You know, we have the mind of love in us, which in the ancient teachings was called the mind of Christ. And then we have that which goes against the mind of Christ. What would that logically be called?
What would the
A mind that goes
mind
against
of
the
Christ?
mind of love, or the mind of Christ in us, would be called logically the Antichrist.
Okay, I see where you're going. Okay.
So carbon-based memory, what's stored in carbon-based memory? That's where the memories of hostility and fear reside. So it's my denial that causes my carbon-based memory to displace my experience of myself as my essence, love, and tells me the lie that my emotions are caused by my trigger. In this case, the trigger is George. And the words "my trigger" are bold, italics, underlined. Must be something important there. And to recognize that most people, when somebody triggers them, they label that person as the cause. Again, their language indicates that that event or circumstance or situation or person is the cause of what's happening inside of us. And if we label a trigger as a cause, then we're never going to get to resolve the actual cause. And this worksheet process, the forgiveness process, is about establishing and rectifying on a cause level rather than, shuffling deck chairs around on the Titanic, rather than trying to work with the world of effect. So then we've already gone through my story. My reality is George has altered the terrain. And notice when you think that thought, what happens with your breath. Oftentimes when people are writing whatever it is in that particular section in 1C, they'll hold their breath. And so at the end of the sentence, there's a reminder to breathe. And the question is asked, if they're the one with the problem, why am I the one with the pain? I look out there and I say, well, you have a problem, and I'm in pain. It's like, wait a minute. If they're the one with the problem, they'd be the one with the pain. If they're not in pain and I am, and I think it's their problem, maybe I have a problem and I don't know it. So I want to start to be able to look inside and look at truth rather than the projection that it's the problems outside of me. And we move on to number two. Number two, the truth is only my thoughts cause my emotional upset. So in the Why Is This Happening to Me Again workshop, I'll have people stop and just get quiet, close their eyes for a moment, and run through a series of feelings. Allow yourself to feel anger, allow yourself to feel sadness, allow yourself to feel fear. And then I'll ask people what they did in order to feel each of those feelings and in order to change from one feeling to another. And when people really look, what they realized was that to change their feelings, what they had to do was change their thinking, which leads to the logical conclusion that thoughts are the cause of feelings. And when you recognize that thoughts are the cause of feelings, then you realize the challenges with what the individual is doing with their own mind energy. Which, if you go to the opening words in the book of John, where we're told it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word became flesh. In Aramaic, what it says is, in the beginning was the mind energy, and the mind energy became flesh. Literally, the way we think becomes the literal, on the level where we believe in chemistry, the literal chemistry in the body. The cell biologists tell us that what they're able to observe is that when somebody thinks a thought, that thought becomes a molecule, a neuropeptide. The neuropeptide circulates around in the structure till it finds a cell with a receptor site that matches. And when that neuropeptide lands on the receptor site, it inserts itself in the cell as chemistry. So now we have the basis for mind-body medicine, and realizing that the number one offender on a cellular level of balanced proper chemistry is our thinking. And so to become cognizant of that is a huge advance in understanding how we create diseases and how we create our healing processes. So if I look at my feeling in number 1B, unhappiness it was, now I'm going to identify specifically the thought. So Michael, what's the thought that you think in order to feel unhappy in that situation?
What comes to my mind as I review the situation is, why is he doing that?
Well, but that's an interesting question. Gee, I'd like to resolve that, but is that really what's causing my unhappiness? My thinking, why has he done that? Or is my thinking, is the thought, you mentioned that he's changed the terrain and messed it up. So maybe the thought is he's destroyed the beauty that I could be experiencing. Maybe the thought is he's destroying the property. There could be a variety of thoughts involved that when I think them result in my being unhappy.
Okay. I see you're taking it further. Okay.
So what's the specific thought you think that if you shift out of it and change your thought, your unhappiness goes away? And it could be there could be a wide variety of things. The thought might be, I should be able to control this. The thought might be, he should be more respectful. The thought might be, he should take care of the environment. The thought might be, he shouldn't be such a horse's ass. There could be a wide variety of thoughts that create the emotional state that I'm experiencing. And a clue can be, it will tend to match something that was probably modeled to me, a way of thinking that was probably modeled to me by my power person.
Very interesting. But any one
and
of
what
those
we tend
fits,
to, right? But so you want to get down to defining for you what the specific thought is and start to develop an awareness of the correspondence between your thinking and your feelings or your emotions. Now, most of the world has fed us a belief. You and I were fed a belief from day one that when that person did this, they made me feel this. When that person did that, they made me feel that. And when this and this and this and this. And, we've literally been trained to ignore the process inside of us, and this is where David Bohm, brought forward this idea of sustained incoherence, that we need to take part in, become cognizant of what happens between the event and the emotion that I feel. And the thing that happens that creates the emotion is my thought. Most of us ignore that, deny that, pretend it never happened, and go, event, emotion, event, emotion. So what we're inviting people to do here is to go event, thought, emotion. Event, thought, emotion. This is about being caused by something that's going on inside of me. And the resolution doesn't come by getting rid of the stimulus for the process that creates the pain in me. The resolution comes when I shift my thinking. So you want to be as specific as possible in each worksheet with the thought that you're using to create the emotion that you identified in number 1B.
Okay. So if I'm understanding right, 1B, unhappiness, and the next step is for me to uncover what is my thought behind that.
Correct. So number 1D is what's the thought? The objective of D is to tap into what's the thought that I'm using to create this feeling, this emotion.
Okay. So as you mentioned a few moments ago, it's several things depending how I continue to look at this.
Right.
Let's pick one. He destroyed the beauty I could be enjoying, because that's the most one that closest to the surface, basically.
Okay. And let me just say that when I do worksheets, I usually have at least a dozen blank sheets in my hand. Mm-hmm. And when I, like say here, you recognize there are several thoughts going on that result in similar or related emotions. And so at this point, when you're aware of that, then once you've done the first thought, the first sheet, then I go to the second sheet and I write one of the other thoughts. I go to the third sheet and write still a third one, so that's the beginning of 3 different worksheets, or 4 or 10 or whatever it happens to be. There's a thing we call a hydra worksheet, and in Greek mythology, the hydra was the creature that when you cut off her head, several other heads appeared. And so when you have a stack of sheets and you key into, oh, there are different pieces to this, that's where you start sheet number 2, 3, 4, whatever.
Okay. So by the Hydra worksheet, is that to indicate there's one thought that's going to trigger all the rest?
Well, there's one event that's going to trigger a series of different thoughts. You know,
okay.
The thought in that circumstance might be, he should have more respect for me, or he should have respect for the land. Mm-hmm. It could be a wide variety. And because the goal is so important in cleaning up the mind, you've got to identify the thinking that's going on in order to accurately get to the goal that's going to resolve or is going to give you the opportunity to look at the unconscious dynamics in yourself. Does that make sense and fit?
At this stage, and what's interesting is, I was just thinking, I've done this. This was one of the first I've done, and just speaking with you about it is so much deeper. The things that I didn't pick up on my own, so much here. But that will come in time and practice.
Exactly. And, you write a particular thought down, and a part of the Hydra can be, oh, man, that's exactly what my brother used to do to me. That's exactly what my dad used to do to me. That's exactly what that neighbor girl used to do to me. And then you see that the real issue is quite different from the issue you thought was going on. There's actually, Jeannie explained earlier how to get to the archives of special radio shows. And the first radio show where we did a complete worksheet with someone was 11 years ago. And this worksheet is on the website, was done with a woman who's a medical doctor. And she started out, her father had passed away, and a real estate agent had taken over his house, which was her inheritance, and had let it go and fall into some measure of ruin. So that's where she started with her worksheet. By the time she finished with the worksheet, she had gone from, that was the starting point. Then the insight came that, a couple of years earlier, she had worked with a child who had cancer, and the chemo doctor, I think it was a chemo doctor or a radiologist or whatever, ended up becoming very upset because she brought him to healing, and he didn't need the services of this, whatever it was, radiation or chemo doc. And the guy went after her and had her license revoked because she used natural means for healing with this kid. So that was the second, like, whoa, this is what this worksheet's really about. And then when she got down to the bottom of the worksheet, and it's powerful, I mean, you can listen, you can just hear the shift in her as she goes through that worksheet and sees it. But where she ends up is she realizes that it's really about an issue she had with her dad when she was a kid. That's where she ended up. That's where her healing happened. And so that's why writing and paying attention all the way through the worksheet is so important, because the mind doesn't just generate realities based on there's a stimulus out there. As I said earlier, there's the TV, there's a piece of art in the wall, there's the candle. That reality doesn't happen because of that. Reality happens because of what's triggered inside of us. And when we start looking inside, it becomes a whole different game.
A lot there, Michael. Wow.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We're on it. Remember, this is 43 years of developing the brain cells for, this is what he was talking about when he was talking about forgiveness. And you start to see that, of course, who could live a sane life with these kind of underlying dynamics that we're not even aware of going on inside of us? And what did he come to do? He said, I come to bring you life. Life is love flowing through a cell. I come to loose in you that which binds the flow of love through you. In essence, is what he's saying. And you don't do that by just going, Hail Mary, or whatever the particular sect of the 32,000 sects of Christianity that are out there, whatever they say you do. It isn't, none of it's that simple. So then number 1E, what's my punishment thought? Now oftentimes people say, I don't have any punishment thoughts. That's usually just BS. That's usually just, I'm supposed to be a nice person, and so I don't ever look at this. But the truth is, underlying virtually every upset, there's a punishment thought. And the punishment thought is often pointed at whoever the worksheet's being done on, or can be turned towards self. And so is there a punishment thought?
Mm-hmm. This is a point when I was doing this myself, I thought, what in the world is this about? And I can say now, by what you've explained for the last 15 minutes, that there's something underneath that will bring this out. I couldn't figure it out before, but I know there's something to it now. And you took the words right out of my mouth. I don't want to punish him, but apparently there's a whole lot more there that I just don't realize yet.
Well, let me ask the question. So you're sitting at your front window enjoying the view, and he comes along and does whatever it is he's doing. Is there a part of you that could easily get up and go out there and yell at him? Or dress him down, or curse him out, or? There's the punishment thought. A lot of people will say, well, I don't want to punish them. I just don't want anything to do with them anymore. You know what the worst punishment on planet Earth is? And they've actually built prisons in America, recognizing this as the most horrific punishment you can do. They built prisons specifically designed for the worst kind of punishment that's possible, and that is to put somebody in isolation.
Solitary confinement.
Solitary confinement. And they know that people in solitary confinement, by and large, go stark raving nuts. And you know what? We still have prisons being operated in America that have that as their purpose, putting people in solitary confinement in order to get vengeance on them. And it's insane.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the punishment thought toward George? And by the way, I designed this worksheet when we were on the road traveling we would do a different city. We'd be on the road from from September till June generally, and we'd be in a different city every week. So handing out a piece of paper, this could easily be spread out over 4 or 5 pages, but when you're traveling and on the road in a different city every week, you can't carry that much paper. So I've purposely kept it to, 1 page, but this is a place where, you can have a notebook. Actually, there are many people who, when they do the worksheet, actually write the whole thing out every time, and they just keep a notebook journal.
Yes. I have a friend close by here that had suggested that, and that's how I started my first few. So I like that idea.
Yeah. So what punishment thought would you go with George? And, it might require more paper to do that, number 1C. And then is there any punishment towards self in this situation?
Well, the punishment for George, and I'm going to just scratch the surface here, but at least, at least my thought would be, why are you doing this? Did you talk with the rest of the community? Just all these things go through my mind, and say, do you just going to do it because you can do it? So I'm not sure what kind of punishment that would be, other than, asking and I guess when they're halfway through it, it's too late to stop. So I'm kind of stuck on this one, Michael. Punishment.
Well, some of the punishment thoughts I could imagine, if you were sitting in the front window watching that happen, might be one, to get up and go out there and yell at him. It might be the desire to control him, to change his behavior and control him. Controlling others is a form of punishment.
Mm-hmm.
It might be, the punishment might be to call the police.
Well, from what I just explained, I guess controlling him would be my thought there, to stop it, to
say,
why are you doing this? So I didn't realize controlling, that's a part of punishment. I didn't have any idea.
Yeah, if you stop and think about the difference between someone who has liberty and someone who's being controlled by another, control is a major punishment. Because in essence, what it does is it takes away another's liberty.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you don't have the right to run your life. I know how to run your life. And then, is there any kind of punishment towards self in this situation?
Michael, I don't know how to process that one.
Well, just if you think about it, is there anything that in this circumstance, again, you're sitting there, you're watching what he's doing, you're unhappy, is there any punishment towards self? And, the simple answer might be no.
Can I offer?
Yeah.
Please, Jeannie.
Please.
How many times, and I'm speaking to myself here, but how many times do you just say, okay, I'll just sit here and keep my mouth shut and just take it?
Interesting. Thank you, Jeannie. Which could relate back right to childhood, not being able to express oneself.
Okay, so that would be, that's where you'd start another worksheet.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd make a note.
Connection.
My childhood, not being able to express myself. And actually, isn't that being controlled? Someone's taken away your liberty to express yourself?
Yes, just like you mentioned a moment ago.
Yeah.
With George. Mm-hmm.
Good one, Jeannie. So you completed step 1, A, B, C, D, and E. And then there's a little box there to the right. And, you know, we've talked before about regulatory speech and how powerful words are. And most of us, our reality structures have been formulated under the influence of words. And so verbal release can be a powerful way to start to remove untoward energies from our own structures. And so what we want to do with that little box is take each object from number 1A, B, C, D, and E, and do a verbal release. And so, you know, if we look at the first one, I release and surrender, and of course my name's in number 1A, so it'd be myself, you go down the bottom, to love. I release and surrender my emotion of unhappiness to love. I release and surrender Charlie to love. I release and surrender my story that they're destroying my view to love. I release and surrender my thought and my punishment to love. So using this as a way to verbally begin to direct energy out of your energy field. At first that seems, if one hasn't ever done that, seems a little silly, but once you start tapping in and consciously, verbally directing energy patterns from within yourself, it becomes very powerful. So how about going ahead and you can just do that silently to yourself. I release and surrender myself, my unhappiness, George, the mess he's making, I need to control, to love. Let me know when you're complete. All right.
I'm complete.
So that,
and what's going on here is you're releasing the what type of energy would that be called?
Whatever kind of quality of energy I'm holding, I'm surrendering it. I'm letting it go and giving it up to the presence of love.
Okay. Okay.
When people first start doing worksheets, generally speaking, it's around the things where they have upset. So there's some form of hostility or fear going on. And you recall we talked about the idea that hostility and fear means mind is using corrupt data and is telling us a lie. And most people just absolutely love their lies. I mean, they're hooked to their lives, their lies. It keeps them innocent. It allows them to live in the religion of blame. It's all everybody else's fault. And a person who lives in that world has no concept of how to honor truth. So they tend to live in blockage of truth most of their lives. So number 2, recognizing that I've perhaps fallen in love with my lies and been living in these lies of my mind for, you know, the better part of my life, especially when it comes to conflicting situations, then number 2, I want to move in a different direction. I'm going to give my mind some different instructions. And so I choose to honor truth. And when I choose to honor truth, I'm giving my mind permission to show me the truth. Whereas when I spoke out of denial, you made me mad, I told my mind it had to tell me the lie that somebody else was the cause of my mad. So I'm going to shift, recognizing number 1, if it's based in hostility or fear, is a lie, and I've been believing it. So now I'm going to honor truth. And I'm willing to face and process out all disease-producing energies for or from all of my relations. And I kind of borrowed that from the Native Americans. When Native Americans went into a sweat lodge or healing ceremony, they had a phrase that they used, matakwiasan, that essentially meant for all of my relations. In other words, they understood that when they needed some healing, it wasn't just they that were involved in the healing, but it was literally their generations. And so, aside from honoring truth, I'm offering that I'm willing to look at these generational patterns and willing to remove them. You know, you go to that story of the Jews wandering in the desert for 40 years. What had to happen to get out of the desert? They said the old generation had to die off. It's these generational patterns. And, you know, I think we can just about guarantee that a group of very bright people who understood astronomy quite well were not lost in a 35 square mile area for 40 years. It wasn't about a hot, sandy place. The desert is a code word for the unconscious. It was people who had no idea, didn't have a clue of what was going on inside themselves and what they were doing to themselves. As you've spoken about a couple of times, just going through step one, it's like, whoa, I didn't realize things went that deep. Whoa, that's a lot more meaningful than I ever thought. That's called living in the desert, when we don't understand what we're doing to ourselves. And so here, I'm offering that I'm willing to take on all of the generational patterns. Again, that story, the Jews were in the desert. What had to happen? The old generation had to die off. It wasn't about old people and old physical bodies physically dying. The root of the word generation, tanari, it means cause. All of the causes held in the mind had to go in order to get out of the insane world that most of us inherited. And then, and we're going to run out of time, so we're going to do this another day yet, I willingly go through the physical, mental, and emotional symptoms of healing. And we'll pick it up with that in our next session.
Mm-hmm. Well, Michael and Jeannie, thank you so much. And we all want to wish you a wonderful time next week.
All right. I appreciate it. Lots of love and blessings.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.